Everybody, Marcus here. Hello, Facebook Live, Instagram Live, YouTube. Thanks for tuning in wherever you're tuning from. Talk about tomatoes today. This is the middle of the winter or the beginning of the winter, but it's cold. And tomatoes, people ask us, Marcus, where do you buy your tomatoes? In fact, a local farmer said to me 2 weeks ago, man, your tomatoes are incredible. Where are you buying that kind of tomato this time of the year? And when I told him, he's like, wow, that's pretty awesome. So here's how we source tomatoes in the wintertime, because of course, when tomatoes are in season, they all come locally, really locally. In fact, our tomatoes in the wintertime even come locally. There are tons and tons of, not tons, but there's more and more greenhouse growers, year-round greenhouse growers that are making some amazing tomatoes. Really awesome. So we buy from primarily two different local farms, one local and one in Maine, farms that do year-round tomatoes. The specialized tomatoes are doing a really awesome job. And this local farmer from Sullivan County is like, Marcus, man, your tomatoes are just really awesome. He actually called me the next day and said, I'm still thinking about that tomatoes you had yesterday. And this was literally like 2 weeks ago. He was like, I got to know where you're buying them from, where you're getting them. So I first want to talk about where not to buy tomatoes from. Okay, most tomatoes that you go into the stores and see right now are coming out of Central America, Mexico, or Florida. Now, Florida has some serious downfalls with tomatoes. There's a couple good companies there in Florida that are doing a job, but typically the part of the problem with tomato Floridas are, first of all, it's sand. The soil is sand. Tomatoes do not like sand. It rains a lot in Florida. Tomatoes do not like moisture. Tomatoes are originally from like the deserts of Peru. The very first tomato out there were these little tiny tomatoes. You don't need to even water. You didn't even need to water the tomato plant. In fact, now your tomato plants, you barely need to water them. They're used to a very arid climate. That's what tomatoes are just naturally accustomed to. That's how they evolved. So Florida has way too much rain, way too much sand. They don't like the sandy soil. And because of that, Florida has to spray tons and tons of pesticides. I forgot what the numbers were. It's like thousands and thousands of dollars per acre of just pesticides, fungicides, things like that to control all the mold and the bugs on tomatoes in Florida. So it's very hard to grow an organic tomato in Florida. It's done. There are some people doing it, but it's not the norm. And so the norm is to spray tons and tons of chemicals on the tomatoes. So those are the first two problems with tomatoes that are coming out of Florida. The other problem is the labor force for tomatoes in Florida is horrific. A lot of these are migrant workers that come in and literally get paid or don't get paid. It's a very, 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 very unfair labor system that they have for tomatoes. Most of these people are totally off the grid. They live in trailers or not even like a real trailer, but like a cargo trailer that some of these tomato growers provide for them. There's no bathrooms. It's pretty horrific. If they try to escape, there's consequences. I mean, it's a pretty mafia-driven situation a lot of times with tomato Floridas and the guys down there and the companies, the producers. They're just very, very corrupt when it comes to labor. They pay the guys a couple dollars per bucket to go through the rows and pick them. So it's a very, very unfair labor force. And of course, the tomatoes are waxed. And typically the person who grows the tomatoes isn't the one who markets the tomatoes because they change hands so many times. You have the companies, the bigger companies, the well-known companies, they're just packers. So they just buy tomatoes from the open market from whatever farm has tomatoes available, and they just put it through the system and put their label on it, and they don't really grow them themselves. That's just the way the consolidation world works. Same thing with Reggiano cheese. People selling the Reggiano cheese, the Parmesan, are not the ones who are making it. They're just the consolidators. They're buying it from the farmers. So there are one or two or three really good companies in Florida that are doing tomatoes the right way. So don't think that all tomatoes are bad. Now, one of the biggest problems with a Florida tomato is, well, there's a lot, like I said, there's lots of problems, but one of the issues here is that back in the 1880s, they passed a law that no tomato can leave the state that is red. They're all left green. So they're picked very, very immature. So they're not vine ripened. They're picked very immature. then they're shipped and gassed as a result. So that's why Florida tomatoes in the wintertime taste like garbage. It's like cardboard. I always hear the thing, oh, those tomatoes taste like cardboard. Well, that's why. There's actually a law. There's actually a law that you're not allowed to ship green tomatoes out of the state because they knew way back then that they could monopolize the market or come up with very strict guidelines to basically make their tomato the tomato of choice. Now, California grows great tomatoes. The California industry is typically for canning. That's how that works. So you won't really see any canned tomatoes come out of Florida, but you will see canned tomatoes come out of California. And that's why California has different soil, different climate, better quality tomatoes. You will see a fresh tomato out of California, but that's not the norm as far as when you're going into, like, if I were to buy tomatoes today from a distributor, they're going to be Florida fresh, California canned. That's just the way it works typically. There's Jersey tomatoes too, Jersey canned tomatoes, and Jersey year-round, Jersey fresh tomatoes as well. Jersey has a great industry for that. So, but as far as going back to this tomato that comes from Florida, it's just sometimes it's not really a great product to be buying. So, and of course the flavor, so ethically, environmentally, and flavor-wise, it's not good. So here's what we do for tomatoes. So we buy tomatoes from a couple different places in the wintertime. One of my best favorite farms is here locally, Daigle Farms. They have a greenhouse tomato. I heard that there's a greenhouse coming in Pine Bush. There's also a place in Warwick that does year-round or hothouse or winter tomatoes. They're pretty expensive, like $6 a pound when I hear retail. I've seen them once or twice. So there are places in the area that will grow year-round tomatoes. So Daigle Farms is our first choice. They're local. They're right there, Orange County. Our next choice is a place in Maine called Backyard Farms. And we actually got their tomatoes in today. They grow them in clusters of 5. That's the magic number, is 5 in the cluster. They have about 40 acres of greenhouses, and they grow a really, really awesome tomato as well. Again, not my first choice. My first choice is here local in the Hudson Valley, but sometimes I can't get deliveries because just the way the farm hubs deliver. I'm not every day. Every day, literally 6 days a week, I can get these from one of our distributors, these Maine tomatoes. And the flavor on these is really good. This is what the one farmer actually called me about. He said, "Mark, those tomatoes last night." I said, "Well, they came from Maine. This is the farm." So about 40 acres of greenhouses in Maine they do. These ones came in today. Wednesday, I think, or Thursday, we'll get the Daigle Farms back in again. So we kind of rotate back and forth based upon when the trucks are delivering to us. So that's the story on the tomatoes that we buy in the wintertime. Folks, you get what you pay for. 100% get what you pay for. I often say that. In the Florida tomato world, tomatoes are dirt cheap. Like I could literally go to probably Restaurant Depot today and buy 25 pounds for $20. I paid far more for these tomatoes. Same thing with the Daigle tomatoes, far more. But when a farmer tells you that your tomatoes are awesome and where you're getting them, you kind of be like, okay, I did my job and I got an awesome tomato. So thank you to that farmer who called me the next day and said, man, awesome tomatoes. So of course, folks, you get what you pay for. Like I said, most tomatoes, if they're not coming from Florida, they will be coming from Mexico or from other Central American countries. But Mexico is a big producer as well. And you know, a lot of times those aren't farms. Those are just packers. Even the organic producers like Del Cabo looks like they have a great tomato. It's organic, certified organic. They're not really growers. They're just buying organic tomatoes from small farmers that are growing organic. So again, it's a packer consolidation-based system, and that's how you get distribution throughout the country, is you contract out, just like Purdue. Purdue is not the farmer. Purdue is the packer, the consolidator. Same thing in the beef world. Montfort, IBP, Excel. These guys don't raise the cattle. They just consolidate it at the last, 30, 90 days of the cattle's life. They get put into their consolidated feedlot, get pumped, and then obviously their brand is put on it. So there's always all these different stages when it comes to agriculture. So cattle has literally 7 stages. You have the person who calves it. You have the person who then, the mid feeder who just puts it on pasture, and it literally it can go to auction every single time as it's going down the line. So the person who calves it is not the person who is really raising it out. He might auction it off to a guy who's putting it on grass pastures, and they do nothing but grass, because the mid feeder's job is to do as little work as possible or spend as little possible on food. The mid feeder then sends it to the finisher, and the finisher is a consolidated feedlot where they pump it full of grain, pump it full of antibiotics, pump it full of everything they possibly can to get as much weight on it. And then from there, it gets packed, then it gets to ship to a distributor, then the distributor, then to the restaurant, then the restaurant to the end consumer. So there's all these different layers of how that works. So again, just because you see what looks to be a beautiful brand in a store doesn't mean they're actually the producer. They're just the consolidator. All right. So that's how that works. And the tomatoes are no different. Tomatoes are packed by consolidators, not really the real farm. This one is an actual real farm tomato. The farm is the one packing this and shipping this out. Same thing with the Daigle farm from local. I did get scammed last year on tomatoes from another local farm. I don't really buy from much anymore, but I thought I was buying their local tomatoes, year-round farm, hothouse tomatoes, winter tomatoes. And in the box, they left one of the stickers on from an imported tomato, and I was a little bit upset. They knew I was upset about that, and the distributor knew I was upset. And it kind of ruffled some feathers because I definitely felt that was wrong, thinking that I was buying something local, and I wasn't. So needless to say, I don't buy much from that farm anymore unless I know they specifically grew it. They're not my first choice by any means anymore. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. And eat, learn, live. Talk to you later.